If you are at all interested in window managers on Wayland, there are two projects you've almost certainly heard of. The first being Hyperland, at its core a tiling window manager. Mostly, and we'll get to that. The other project, Neri, which is what I personally use. It is a scrolling window manager. Basically, you have an infinite scrolling plane. It also tiles, but you can have as many windows as you want without having to compromise on window sizing and spacing, things like that. And both these projects are absolutely rocketing in popularity. Look at the GitHub stars. Niri is actually slowly but surely catching up. Look at the Arch Linux package installs. Both of these projects are filling a niche, both these projects are getting a lot of popularity, and both these projects are massively succeeding because of it. But neither of these projects are unique ideas. We've had tiling window managers even before Linux. Arguably the first one, there's a bit of debate about what the first one is. You can at least track it back to 1988. And there are countless options on X11. There's not as many options on Wayland, but there are certainly options. When it comes to scrolling, there's a bit less of a choice. The GNOME extension PaperWM is generally regarded as the start of scrolling. This has existed very quietly since about 2017. Nobody really knew it existed until maybe a couple of years ago. Since then, there have been things like the Mac port, PaperWM Spoon. There are other Mac versions as well. There is the KDE extension Carousel. There's a few other little options here and there, but really until Neri, your best option was PaperWM, but that meant you had to use GNOME. Whilst the origin of these projects are very, very different, I do think the success they see do share a lot of similarities. When Hyperland came along, whilst there were other options available for doing tiling, there wasn't really a good dynamic option on Wayland. Sway existed for a long time at that point, but Sway is a manual tiler. Like i3, you pick the direction that windows tile in, and yeah, there are tiling scripts that make it do things dynamically, but it's not working out of the box, it's a little bit scuffed, sometimes windows don't behave correctly, and having something that natively does that is just gonna be better. Also at the time, Sway didn't have a great reputation for adding in features that people really wanted to see. For example, people like to blur their terminal. This is from July 2019, blur kernels, just, a way to configure the blur. Now, Sway didn't even have blur to begin with, and when Drew DeVault was working on the project, he closed it as completed, it wasn't completed, it was just not going to be implemented, and then when Simon Sir was on the project, he said we're not going to do that. To this date, this is still not a feature in Sway. And choices like this is what led to the existence of projects like Sway Effects, which is a soft fork of Sway that adds in nice eye candy that tiling window manager users want to see, like blur and rounded corners and window shadows and dimming unfocused windows, which I don't understand why this is something that was just never added into mainline Sway. Somebody else had already done the work for you. Not adding this is basically just shooting the project in the foot. Even back in the i3 days, i3 and i3 gaps, which added in window gaps, were eventually merged into the same project because that was a feature that people wanted in their tiler. Not having that just doesn't make any sense and immediately turns people away from your project, regardless of anything else you might be doing. Now, there are other projects at the time like DWL, which was basically DWM, so you configured it through C files, you patched it yourself. It had an audience, but it was a very niche audience. Nowadays, you have Mango WC, but that was a much newer project. Also, there are projects like River, but weirdly, River just never got the time of day. River is a cool project, it has its community that uses it, but for some reason, I don't know, it just never became the exciting thing to talk about. So Hyperland appeared when there was basically a gap. There wasn't a great dynamic option that had all of the eye candy that people wanted, that added a bunch of features that people were asking for. Basically, any random little feature that you might want in a tiler probably just got added into Hyperland. So if you want basically anything, it's probably gonna be there. This was also happening around the time Wayland was actually gaining traction, the time it started to unsuck, where basic things that you needed to be there, like window capture, were becoming features that existed. So a lot of it was really right place, right time. As for Neri, it also was right place, right time. People getting interested in this scrolling thing, but didn't want to do scrolling and have to install GNOME. Hyperland paved the way for exciting compositors, but Niri came along and said, okay, let's take this interesting model and then make it accessible. Then there is the customization aspect. It's one thing for Hyperland to have a lot of features, but you don't really want every single feature. Some users want things, other users don't. So make everything configurable. And the Hyperland wiki really does demonstrate that. If you've never used it, if you've never used Hyperland or never configured Hyperland, just have a look at the wiki. It's really well laid out, and look at just how much you can play with. Now, sometimes there are format changes, and sometimes the config file is broken. Doesn't happen that often, but there was a recent change a few months ago. But there is a lot of things you can play with. If you really like to have an environment that is exactly the way that you want it, this is a really good choice for that. So much so that even if he's gonna be a bit of a jerk about it, even if he's gonna say some stupid things about it, even Vaxry cannot escape having scrolling as a core part of Hyperland. It was previously a plugin, and it's being worked on as a core feature, because people really like the idea of scrolling. And as I said, Hyperland basically just does everything. Now, Niri is quite a bit younger of a project, so obviously it's going to have less things added to it. Also, it's not trying to be absolutely everything, but anything that you could reasonably want from a scrolling environment is going to be here and is going to be configurable, and honestly, the config file format is pretty straightforward as well. But what I think really helped these projects isn't necessarily the project themselves, it is the developing ecosystem around the projects. And I don't mean the Hyper ecosystem. I don't mean all of the random side projects that Vaxry has decided, yeah, you know what, I'm just gonna start these because why not? Some of these make sense, but like, why do you need a shutdown tool? Why do you need a Qt 6 engine? Why do you need a wall? I don't know. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the shell, is the graphical environment around the tiling window manager, around the scrolling window manager, around your compositor. So if you're a long-time window manager user, actually if you're still using window manager now, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. Going back to X11, you would grab a bar, like a poly bar. On Wayland, you might grab like a way bar, for example. You'd get a notification daemon like Dunst, for example. You'd get some sort of wallpaper manager, a launcher like a D menu or a Rothy, and all of these other little components that sort of emulate the idea of a desktop environment, but they're all these disconnected projects, and trying to make them all work together can be done relatively easily, but it's always going to be a little bit weird. But effectively what you were doing was building your own graphical shell. It was your shell, it was a custom shell, but it was effectively a shell. On Wayland, you can still do that, and many people do. Right now, I'm running Waybar, but now you can actually have something that is all sort of working together, an integrated shell that actually feels like it's part of a single thing because, well, it is part of a single thing. There are really cool projects like QuickShell. This is built off of Qt Quick and is basically a toolkit for building your own shell, and this is something you could always do, but by building off of Qt Quick, by providing that like baseline toolkit, it makes it really easy to go and do, and really easy to build something which is not just built off of Waybar or Polybar or Dunst or any of these existing components, but is actually truly your own custom environment. And whilst Qt Quick is relatively easy, and this makes it relatively easy to build an environment, I understand that not everyone has programming experience and really wants to get involved with that. So because of that, there are projects built off of Quick Shell that basically do the job of being that full shell. There is Dank Material Shell. This has a lot of customization, obviously not as much as just doing everything by hand, but because it is built on Qquick, you could use this as a baseline and then build your own thing off of that. Also, recently, I believe this did get packaged in Fedora. There are other projects like Noctalia. Again, it's a very similar style of project, built off of Qquick, has a lot of customization, has a bit of a different vibe to it, a bit of a different feel to it, but also, really cool project. Also, one of the projects demoed on the website, that was called Caelestia. You can also go and install that if that is something that you prefer as well. Rather than being a bunch of disconnected elements that kinda sorta work together, this does sort of bridge the gap between a window manager, a regular compositor by itself, and a full desktop environment shell. Now you can have a lot of the power from a desktop environment, but without having to have all of the extra stuff that you don't really want, right? Because you install a desktop environment, especially if you install the entire thing, you're going to get a bunch of weird applications that you probably don't use, right? I install KDE, I don't use Kate. I'm going to keep using Vim. I don't care about the Plasma Launcher. What's it called? Crunner? I'm going to keep using dmenu. I don't care about any of that additional stuff. But this lets me have that experience without needing to do all of that, without needing all of these extra things that I'm not going to use. And of course, if you like a full desktop environment, keep using a full desktop environment. If you like a window manager by itself without having a full shell around it, keep doing that. That is totally fine. But if you want to bridge that gap, now it is basically easier than ever to do so. And this piece, I think, explains it well. If Hyperland, Sway, Neri, and their ilk are attempts to deconstruct the desktop environment, Dank Linux tries putting it back together again. Projects like this have made window managers considerably more approachable. Whilst, yeah, I've always enjoyed piecing things together, and I'm probably always going to enjoy that, at the same time, I understand the appeal of the Oh My ZSH. I understand the appeal of Doom Emacs, things like that. I understand the appeal of getting something which does all of the things for you, and you don't really have to think about it. Now, there's other things you might want to think about, but you don't have to piece everything together. It's more like tweaking it to be the way you want it to be. Now, specifically on scrolling, I recently saw this post from Theo. The Niri window manager feels like exactly what I was looking for. Holy shit, this is good. So he recently swapped to CachyOS and also Niri, and for him, it has been a massive workflow improvement. Now, I think there's a good reason why scrolling kind of makes sense to a lot of people that don't necessarily have a tiling background, right? If you're a tiling user, you kind of understand tiling. You're used to having windows be in smaller boxes, but let's just stop necessarily thinking entirely in computer terms and sort of go back to office metaphors. So, when you're dealing with Hyperland, your windows have to get smaller and smaller and smaller until eventually you put things onto a separate workspace, but you might not be putting things on a separate workspace because of a natural ordering. Whereas on Neri, you get as much space on your desk to spread things out as you want. So you can put a document here, 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 and at no point do you have to say, okay, there are too many documents in this grouping, I can't see them at their full size. You can just cycle along that scroll, you can move from document to document, and read them and use your applications perfectly fine. And what this allows you to do is have a completely natural grouping of applications. So you might have your development environment and then Git and then something else related to that, maybe like, running the application itself, and then maybe a debug tool, and all of these things are in one environment. You don't have to spread them across multiple workspaces. You can have them all logically grouped together, and then your second workspace, that can be another grouping of applications, and you can have as many things as you want, assuming obviously you have the resources to do so. But tiling forces you to break up that natural grouping, and it's something that if you like tiling and you're used to it, it works. But it doesn't click as much as having as much space on your environment to work with and then swapping when you want to make a separate group. And that's exactly what Theo was doing here. So he had these different groupings of AI tools running. I don't fully understand his setup, but basically there was a logical group of these tools on each workspace, and you didn't have to do anything weird with that. This is something which I think for a lot of people, once you get used to obviously having to do things with keybinds and stuff like that, once you're at that point, I think scrolling just makes a lot more sense, and especially makes a lot more sense than just having a messy floating environment where windows are covering windows, which are covering windows, which puts you in basically the same situation as a tiler, right? You can use Windows in full screen and then have things split across your workspaces, or you can have everything spread out and then access things as you want to access them. Neither workflow is correct and the only way to do things, but it's an idea that I think logically makes sense. Hyperland and Niri came along at a really good time, and they created this environment around them that people really wanted to use. So people started creating these shells, and now we have this positive feedback loop where they're not slowing down in popularity. If anything, they're both growing faster than ever, and I don't know where this goes. I don't know, what people are going to be using in 5 years from now, but what I can say is this is a really exciting time to be a fan of Wayland window managers. So let me know, what are you running? Are you using Neri? Are you using Hyperland? Are you using a window manager in general? And what do you think about all of the exciting things that are being worked on in this space? The quick shell stuff and all of these custom things built on top of it? And is that enough of a reason, if you're not using a window manager, to actually give one a try? I'd love to know. So let me know your thoughts down below. If you liked the video, go like the video. If you go subscribe as well, if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon subscribes daily bearer pay linked in the description down below. That's gonna be it for me, and honestly, I don't know where this goes.